Leadership strategies in Formula One are quite unique, but I think all of them can be applied into a business. And I think businesses across all sectors can take learnings of things that we've focused and prioritized on over the years. I mean, we're a team sport, competing at an incredibly high level with ultra competitive teams, and so first and foremost, we spend a lot of time on teamwork and collaboration. We're really trying to make sure that everybody across the organization is working towards common goals, understanding the objectives, and really kind of invested in each other and invested in each other's success. Whilst the level of competition in Formula One is so high that these marginal gains that we can get from everybody accepting compromise can have a huge impact. At Haas F1 specifically, we're a much smaller team than most others on the grid. One of our strengths, and again, I think this applies nicely into business, is having that very agile approach. So, we're really looking at how to shift and shape. And, we're seeing all over the media all the time about how industry, technology in particular, is having, huge impacts into business and is moving at a real rate. So again, having elasticity in the ability to shift to different scenarios for us is hugely important, particularly on race weekends. We spend ultra amounts of time preparing, getting everything ready, and then you just need a weather incident or an incident on track or a component failure, and all of a sudden the strategy across the race weekend changes. So really ensuring that the mindset of people is agile and able to react is important. And then probably my final one would be innovation, really pushing boundaries in Formula One. Innovation, we've seen numerous examples. For the Formula One fans that are listening to this, they'll remember things like the double diffuser in 2009 with Braun GP. A huge innovation, really changed the landscape of the 2009 season. McLaren's F-duct in 2010 was another big one. And so really finding innovations that can almost shape an industry. If you're the first person to get that innovation, you're the person that can benefit from the earliest, noting that your competitors are going to catch up. But whilst you've got that advantage, you can leverage it and make the most of it before that happens. I think culture in general is hugely important, and I think this has become more so probably in the last decade. Collaboration as part of that culture being one vertical. Within our world, we spend a lot of time focusing on how we work together effectively. We talked earlier about having common goals, defined objectives that we know that everybody is working towards. And understanding that there's going to be compromise. I've worked in businesses before where there's exceptional lanes of people working towards their own set of objectives, and some of them doing an incredible job at it. Without that visibility and without that common set of objectives, everybody sometimes is almost working in contrast to each other. So a lot of the work that we put in F1, again, to get to that kind of marginal gains of competitiveness, is saying, okay, if you've got a particular department that's working on something, guess what? They might actually have to compromise a little bit of their objectives and their resource or their investment in order to put that into another area of the business that perhaps needs additional attention. But if you've got a culture across the whole business and everyone's looking at the top of the triangle, then that compromise almost doesn't have to be a decision. It doesn't have to be a department that says, oh, okay, I'm going to give you up some of my headcount or some of my fiscal resource in order to, for somebody else to use it. That doesn't become a thing. It's almost like this pool of resource or pool of energy that everybody works within. And that compromise, if the culture's done right, that compromise doesn't actually become a thing. It doesn't become a conscious thing in somebody's mind of compromise. It just automatically happens. And so everybody, those lanes that I mentioned earlier, they merge into this kind of virtual triangle where at the top of the triangle is business success. I think there's multifacets of this. I think that clear vision and purpose, I think, is hugely important. and having that self-belief and confidence across the organization to get to wherever that organization is trying to get to. And that takes loads of different sort of energies almost to do it. Having people that are focused on those objectives, reminded of those, and the discipline across the organization to achieve it. Because winning, when we talk about Formula One, when we talk about winning, I think people's minds straight away jump to, drivers standing on the top step of the podium. I don't see it that way. I see winning as success across an organization. The result on a race weekend, that's just the output of the winning mindset. If all of those facets of winning mindset and culture come together, then the results just come. That it's like a byproduct of it. I think you almost come down from the concept of winning a race and come into the organization, and then you start to understand, well, what does winning within an organization means? And that's different for everybody. In Formula One, we have a very obvious set of targets, but for other companies it might be, winning might be doing business sustainably. Winning might be being ultra efficient. Winning might be bringing in huge amounts of investor or funding into the organization. And so understanding what winning means, and then having the discipline and energy to focus on that, becomes almost it becomes part of the fabric of the company. I'm a very half glass full kind of guy, so I have a sort of certain way of saying it'll always be all right. There's always a way, and I think building that in and getting that across the organization, I spend quite a bit of time with my teams just saying, actually, even if the outlook looks grim, let's say we had a really bad race weekend, or in the case of some seasons we've had pretty bad seasons, actually grouping people together and saying winning doesn't mean standing on the top step of the podium. What winning means is understanding objectives, working towards them, and understanding how you're doing on those. And what do they say? Eating the elephant one bite at a time. It's about breaking a challenge down into multiple steps and winning at each phase. I mean, in Formula One, risk is everything. We could talk for hours on this. How do I paraphrase it? I think understanding the way we do it here is we understand that risk is everywhere. Risk is a constant. And in extreme examples, if you walk out of your front door, there's a risk a piano could fall on your head. Well, what you do there is subconsciously everyone is analyzing risk all the time, and in business we do this in Formula One heavily. So we're trying to understand the risk, then we work out, do we need to mitigate it? A lot of risk is just accepted. If we are going to try and accept it, if we are going to try to mitigate it, to what degree are we going to mitigate it? How much resources, how much time are we going to spend into it? So really stage one within risk management is understanding your risk. If you haven't got a good idea of where your risks are, then that's phase one. Phase two is to start understanding, well, where do you accept risk? There's a lot of risks you'll look at and you'll go, well, that's just how we do business. In our team at Haas F1, we look at it slightly different to our competitors. We like risk. Risk is opportunity to a team like ours. We don't have the resources of some of our competitors. So if we're going to try and compete with them, we have to have a different appetite for risk. And so the point I'm making there is that risk management and risk appetite is hugely unique to every industry, every company, and every individual. My appetite to risk might be different to my colleague's appetite for risk. But as part of that culture we talked about earlier, there's a set of risk acceptance that a business pitches itself to and where it sits, and then you get your staff to understand it. In Formula One specifically, we categorize risk into levels, and we do that to try and, really, there's so much data and there's so much risk to understand that we have to categorize it and then prioritize it. So we look at it in instances of things like health and safety is a good example. The safety of our employees, the safety of our drivers, the safety of spectators at races, maybe marshals or media. That's number one. So if we see a risk, where there's a risk to health and safety, we put a very high priority there. And then we come down through things like reliability of the car, performance of the car. Better to have a reliable car than a quick one, because if a quick car doesn't make it to the end of the race, it's not much use. Down into like business efficiency, and the acceptance of risk on that curve drops. So up at the health and safety level, we don't like to accept risk. Down in the business efficiency level, I make risk decisions every hour of every day, and in my role as CIO, it's pretty much what I'm paid to do. My job really is to manage risk and accept it. Sometimes with split decision making, using experience and data to say, actually, somebody's raised a risk, I think we are just going to have to accept that, and we move on. That's a very different approach I would have if somebody came in and raised a risk around health and safety, for example. Oh, data is a great topic. I'm a technology guy. I'm a data guy, so my answer is very data positive. And my first headline there would be to encourage all companies across all facets of industry to become data guys and girls. The data is ultra powerful, and I think honestly businesses are collecting data already. They maybe don't even realize it. You've kind of got that maturity stage of data is businesses that aren't collecting data. Honestly, they're few and far between now. I think there's businesses that are collecting data but are really only looking at a tiny subset of it, right through to businesses that are capturing data, categorizing data, understanding data, and then critically they're making decisions and outcomes based on that data. In Formula One, we collect it everywhere. I could talk for hours about how the telemetry systems and the advancement we've made over the last 10 or 20 or even 50 years from when we first introduced telemetry. Collecting data, video, telemetry data, human performance data, business data, pulling it in. We've been doing that for 30 or 40 years, but actually the maturity within Formula One is what we do with that data. So starting to manipulate it, starting to make decisions on it. We talked earlier about risk management. Data is a huge inputter into risk management, because when you have data, you can understand risk more. When you have to categorize your risk and start to decide if you're going to accept it or you're going to mitigate it, then data is your friend. It doesn't lie. O's and ones are factual. And so the more data you have, the more informed your decision can be that with risk management or within the business. And so, understanding that people will look to Formula One and say, well, I can understand Formula One's need data, it's technology driven sport, but what about my hotel business? And I would challenge them and say, go back down to the operational level, look at where you're capturing data. You've got loads of data coming in about who stays in your hotel, who eats in your restaurant, who uses the gym. So you're going to capture all that data, start to get some maturity around that data. What problems do you want to solve? Hey, people aren't using our in-house restaurant. They're always leaving and going out into town. Okay, great. Well, you're capturing the data on how many people are doing that. Can you understand, are you not upselling into their restaurant, for example, or is there any incentives you can give to get people in there? So it's kind of layer one, capture the data. Layer two, understand what problems you want to solve, and then layer three is using that data for smart decision making. I think cybersecurity is a very wide-reaching topic. In all Formula One teams, and I imagine all sort of visible companies. I say Formula One's a very visible company, and Formula One teams and the organisation. So we put a lot of time into this. But I could do a talk about that layered approach of defence, which is layering software stacks together, making sure that you're covering all bases, password security, multi-factor. But honestly, I think if businesses need to hear that, they're already a little bit behind. A lot of that is fairly standard stuff. I think where advancements can be made in cybersecurity, and certainly at our team, we're putting a lot of time into things like education. Around my business, I've got hundreds of staff. Well, that's hundreds of cybersecurity eyes that I can utilize through training and awareness, bringing my employees on the journey of cybersecurity improvement and cybersecurity development, because the way that the risks and the risk landscape of cybersecurity, and in particular the tools that threat actors have at their disposal, is really shifting. And so the moment you stop pushing your initiatives, your funding, your effort, then you're going to go backwards, and that's where you become vulnerable. So yeah, part of the struggle is keeping up, but the education and making sure that your staff are aware of those shifts of landscape, I think can be really powerful. And they all become advocacy. So as part of our training, we're really trying to, this sounds a tough one, to get people excited about it, get people awareness of it. We've talked a couple of times about culture. If you embed a culture of digital defense, and actually even physical defense, in our world, that's important as well. Then your people come along with your journey, and suddenly it's not a bunch of technical folk, beavering away in the back office, deploying software solutions. They are important, but then there's this front of house kind of set of initiatives where all your people come on those journeys, and suddenly, a senior manager's not afraid to put their hand up and say, hey, I saw this that was slightly out of the ordinary and it didn't feel right to me. Great, there's a set of eyes on, there's a notification, let's take a look at it. And you have to do that right across your stack. I think a lot of businesses are starting on the kind of the operational level, but it's super important to go all the way up to your executive board. And honestly, your the CEO of any business is probably the most targeted person. Super busy, eyes everywhere, no real understanding or deep understanding of cybersecurity. Now, I've got techie folk that'll take care of that. Well, they're the most vulnerable. So get them in on the journey, and if you can foster that as a culture, I think that's a huge improvement. AI in its rawest form has been around for a little while, but I think the explosion of accessibility to non-technical people has brought this into the forefront. And we're on a really aggressive development curve. Every day I read news stories of super cool technologies that are coming out, amazing startups, amazing talent, amazing people that are doing amazing work in this space, but it's every day. And so the way I look at it is I look at AI as a tool in your toolbox. When you go and you fix your car, you take a pack of tools out there, and you wouldn't use a hammer to undo a screw. So if you take AI as a digital tool in your digital arsenal, and you start to align it to solving problems, that's where I think it becomes powerful. So the way I look at it when people bring AI to me is I say, and every senior leader in a business has had this, where an employee said, I think we should be using AI. And I counter that and I say, what do you want it to do for you? What problem are you solving? Take a step back and understand a problem. Let's say, we've got this really repetitive task that I have, so-and-so in finance churning away, and they spend all day on Mondays doing it. I go, okay, yeah, that sounds really inefficient. Let's see if AI is the tool for that. And quite often it is. So you inject an AI workflow or a piece of technology or a supplier or some software, and you solve the problem. And I think that's where I think it's super powerful. Where technologists need to be at the forefront of that is understanding its capability, because only when you understand its capability can you align it to a problem. So when your business, a lot of CIOs will talk about, digital transformation being that, having the technology group underpinning the organization and empowering the organization to move forward. Well, what a great example this is. If the digital part of the organization can understand and be fully aware of AI's capabilities today and tomorrow and so forth, then when problems arise within the business, if they've got a seat at the table, they can put their hand up and say, I've got a solution for that. There's an AI technology that can take your 500 documents that you're scanning for data, and it will give you the answers in 30 seconds with a 95% efficiency. If that efficiency is okay, noting that AI doesn't always get it right, then you become a real enabler for your business. And if you want to start getting real recognition within the business, well, what a great example to get that.